leaving, please join me in welcoming the director, Eran Riklis.
Thank you.
Eran, there's so much to talk about in this film. I'm going to ask a few questions and then we'll throw it out to the audience. Watching the film, realizing this is an adaptation of several novels, I wonder if you could talk a bit about the final segment of the film and the whole development of swapping identities with Yonatan. Is that in the novels, or is that something you and Syed developed?
Honestly, I don't remember. And, at some point you read the books, and I spent about a year and a half with Syed, and Syed spent, I think, 5 years since he wrote the first draft, and there were various directors attached, and nothing happened. And yeah, there was an Italian director and a Brazilian director attached, and finally they came back to do, the poor Israelis, and we had a very intense year in which we had a real struggle with both books, because this whole segment of the childhood, which is obviously in the original script that I received, was like 50 minutes long. And I immediately sensed that I had to cut it down as much as I can, even though it's enchanting and it's funny and it's wonderful. And yet it's only an introduction. So that was a large part of the work. And then, the identity, it's a very emotional process. And, for Syed and for me, and it's almost like you're dealing with very sensitive issues, and almost every decision you make is going to be hypersensitive in terms of the audience. And even for us, each of us coming from obviously different places and different backgrounds, but at the end of the day, we're both, creative people, and we want to do something which we'll feel comfortable with. And for me, it's very important that the audience, even if it's not comfortable, but it's still enjoying these 2 hours in the dark in front of this of a film. So a lot of it was intuitive. A lot of it was, the essence was there. But how do you actually handle a burial sequence in which you're burying, one of the favorite characters in the film that you really feel for, and it's from the point of view of Iyad, it's from the point of view of Edna, the mother, and it's like you're really juggling between those things, and not to talk about the controversial side. Here's a Jewish kid being buried in a Muslim burial. So there's a lot going on there. And I think the only thing I can say is that the final image, the final image, is something that came about actually in the editing room, because I felt the need to end the film the way I started it, but I think even the beginning was not supposed to be him on the roof. I can't even remember why I shot him on the roof. It's kind of funny, but I think it was a totally different scene. He was actually waiting for his father on the roof to sort of say something. Didn't work. But I suddenly felt I had this amazing image of this kid, totally different, he looks different. He just came back from Berlin. And he's still wondering about his life. So the fact is, for me, it's an open end. Not necessarily leading to, Dancing Arabs Part 2, but maybe, the revenge, who knows. I'll be back, kind of thing.
But that's what I love about the ending, and I asked everyone to pay attention to the opening and closing images, because it's so melancholy, it's so uncertain, and it's so open after everything he's been going through, and you hear the call to prayer in the background, and I think it's just the perfect ending. And yet, at the same time, when you're talking about how the childhood sequence is so different from the later sequence, the rest of the film, it sets up everything beautifully. I mean, I had forgotten about the anecdote about bringing the Jewish kid home, which is so wonderfully played, but also is kind of with a foreshadowing of the friendship with Yonatan later on, which is much deeper and much more connected.
Yes. But the beginning is really interesting, because it's this whole childhood segment is very, on one hand, it's very written. My dad's a terrorist is not something you invent on the spot. But on the other hand, let's say when we're climbing and he says this wonderful line, "Mom, I have my Jew," or "Brought my Jew," which okay, I'm sure you all laughed here. But then I suddenly realized the night before shooting that I have to have the kids climb up the stairs, and there's no dialogue in the script. So I made that up, I think at 2 a.m., sort of said, okay, the kid looks a little bit like Sharon, and And Iyad could be Arafat, basically. So I said, I added that line of dialogue, and again, it's those kind of things which are the magical part of creating a film. I think that.
Again, that ties in perfectly with the scene in the translation when the Building Bridges American comes. It's like the Jews are coming next week. All this high-flown rhetoric, and then the Palestinian map versus the Israeli map. It's all wonderfully layered in that way.
And I have to say, it's all true, in the sense of. Really, the Arabs inside Israel, that's the way they're educated, because the system is by the state. So it's like you have Arab kids learning about the first Jews who came from Russia to Palestine, later Israel. And it's kind of say, why do they need to know that? But I guess they do. So it's like it's this kind of curious situation.
And Iyad is the expert on the War of Independence in his class.
Sorry?
Iyad is the expert on the War of Independence.
Yeah, that's a very decisive scene, in the sense of, I think it's very underplayed in the way it's done. And underplayed is actually, I think, what I really tried to achieve in this film, is to really, because not because I wanted to be cautious, but because I felt everything's out there. You just have to be elegant about it and sort of really bring home the reality, and you have to be a little bit detached from it. And always worry about the emotional side, which is really what I tried to do. For me, this was a very emotional film that came out of my, my veins, basically.
Yes. And I think it works enormously, even with Tawfiq's performance.
Yeah.
Even just that scene of him driving away after Naomi has broken up with him. It takes a while for him to actually start showing emotion, and you just feel that he is shell-shocked because he's not really telegraphing any emotion until later as he's driving. It's very powerful.
He's absorbing. I think this is not working. He's absorbing. He's the kind of absorbing type, and I have to say that in reality, Tawfiq, who plays Iyad, was basically playing out his own life. It was amazing to me, and I got onto it quite quickly during the auditions. That I found, somebody who I don't have to tell him anything. It's like it's his life, and he also had a Jewish girlfriend, and he also had his heart broken, and everything. And mainly the identity issues that are really becoming, more and more dramatic. I think, especially these days.
Yes.
Really.
Yes. There's always the intimacy between the Arabs and the Jews in Israel is a subject of amazing fascination for me, and to be able to show it that way. I wanted to ask two other questions before we open it up to the audience. So I was struck by what was kind of obvious, but sort of hadn't factored in until I was watching the film today. Music is everywhere. It's on the streets, it's the buskers, it's the trading of music, and of course, music is so central to a teenager's identity. So I thought I would ask you a bit to talk about some of the musical choices there and how that was figured into the screenplay and your direction.
Well, yeah, there were a few things. One, the choice of songs. At the end of the day, it's down to sitting at 3 a.m. in the morning, and 3 a.m. and Googling what songs were popular in 1980, all these kind of things. And suddenly, my first choice was actually Joy Division, which the reason it struck me was the fact that I actually saw a film about Joy Division Control. And the lead singer, Ian Curtis, had epilepsy. He used to collapse on stage. He actually committed suicide when he was 22 years old because he couldn't take it anymore for a variety of reasons. And I felt, okay, that's Jonathan. It's an immediate bond between this music and of course the song. The song itself was a big hit, but
You're tearing me apart.
Yeah, but
yes.
Love Will Tear Us Apart. It's like it was almost too good. And all the other songs, the Israeli songs, are really big hits from the period. Amazing songs, even if you don't understand the lyrics. I felt there was a big rock and roll scene in Jerusalem in the late 80s. Very curious, and so I used a lot of those songs. And for instance, again, script versus film. In the script, it says Jonathan and Iyad and Naomi go to a show in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
What show? So I dug up this rock opera, which amazingly was hugely popular in Israel, despite these lyrics, which are tough. But suddenly I had a scene, because suddenly Iyad is sitting there and he can't look at the scene, he can't hear these words. Naomi, of course, is totally out, and Jonathan is enjoying it, of course, which made sense. And I went to the guy who wrote the lyrics and the guys who wrote the music, all very popular, famous people in Israel. They gave it to me for free, I have to say. Wow. And the band is actually my son's band.
They sounded really good.
Yeah, they sound really good. They broke up, of course. But my son, I have to say, I'm sorry, but my son wrote the whole soundtrack, the music for the film, the original score. So, and he came back from New York after. He's a jazz kid, jazz pianist. And strangely enough, I think a few months before I started working on the film, I heard jazz. Because, you know, the obvious is to kind of go to a kind of, you know, oriental kind of soundtrack, and I felt before reaching that, which at the end you do, I heard jazz, and that's why at the end of the day I went to my son, because I felt he can do that. So yeah, but I think that's where the music is.
What was the name of the rock opera? Do you remember?
Mommy, Mammy. Yeah, just called Mommy. It's about this waitress from from a provincial town who moves to the city. It's a classic kind of, you know, she's used by everybody, and there's always in the Israeli, especially in the mythology of the 80s, it's always like every nice restaurant had Palestinians in the back, you know, in the kitchen. So it's really about that. And it's about the way she, and the way it reflects the film, it's about the fact how she can identify with the Palestinians. You know.
Fantastic. All right, let's throw it out. I have many other questions, but I'm sure you folks have questions as well. Are we doing floating mics? We have people with microphones in the audience, so please raise your hand if you have a question or comment. While we're waiting for someone to ask something, may I ask you also about using the set of the theater in the high school?
The Cherry Orchard.
Yes, could you talk about that? I mean, that is not the most inconspicuous place to have sex. But I mean, it is their kind of special place where they go and communicate with each other.
I have to tell you, the film opened on Wednesday in Paris, in France, and it's running parallel to 50 Shades of Grey. You know. No inhibitions, but yeah, well, I thought, you know, because the relationship is so secretive, that it has to kind of open up. And in a way, the theater for me was, you know, stage was for me to sort of say, okay, this could be on stage, this could be open, this could be exposed to the world, and yet it's not. So that was the kind of thinking that my production designer sort of said, oh, the Cherry Orchard. I said, okay, let's go with it.
Sure, sure.
You know, there's some decisions you make which are kind of, at the end of the day, it's about, I mean, the brain is working, but a lot of it is intuition, in a way.
It works so wonderfully.
Yeah. No question?
Are you kidding?
Oh,
come on.
Yeah.
Regarding the mothers, Naomi's mother's reaction was so different than the young man's mother, and I thought I'd like you to explain that a little bit.
You mean Iyad's mother, the Arab mother? Well, again, it's a really interesting thing, because the reaction of the Arab mother, I'll speak about her first, that was almost, I mean, the actress came to me almost daily, sort of saying, I need a moment where I can show that I'm not the traditional mother who's against everything. And that was the moment I felt, you know, that's a really good moment when she's coming down alone. She has 20 seconds alone without the grandmother, without the kids, without the husband, where she could really show her support. And for me, it's a great moment. You know, it's a great moment that shows, despite the prejudice that we all have towards other people, etc., here's this woman who, against expectation, is actually supporting her son. And then she's gone. You know, then it's almost like she's out of the picture in a way. The Israeli mother, you know, I could say it's a little bit stereotypical in a way, but it's very true. I think it's the kind of reaction. Of course, she's very harsh, and I guess the way it's brought forward by the daughters, you know, it's terrible words in terms of, you know, I wish, you know, tell me you had cancer, tell me you're a lesbian, etc., etc. But it's very true, and I think it's true of, you know, the film is not only about Palestinian Israelis or Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis. It's about the world. I think these kind of situations happen certainly in the States and everywhere, basically, in the world. So I think we're trying to give different points of view. There's also the grandmother who has a totally different kind of approach to everything. She's probably his biggest supporter, but, you know, she's gone at some point.
And it's so ironic that he can't fulfill his promise to her because his father has banished him from the house when he quit school.
Yes.
Please.
This is a rather obvious question, but how did you come up with the title? Is there any significance to it?
Well, it's not me. It's basically based on two books. One is called Dancing Arabs. It was quite a popular book in Israel. I think came out like 7 or 8 years ago. And the other book is called Second Person Singular. So it's a mix between these two books. Dancing Arabs, for me, I'll tell you this, the cover of the book in Israel is an Oriental rug, you know, almost like a Persian rug, with a guy, and you just see the feet, with a pair of, you know, really nifty kind of boots, you know, like that belongs to a rock and roll kind of thing. And I felt that's it, you know, it's really about dancing in two worlds, it's about dancing through identities, it's about dancing through life, it's about dancing to please somebody else, in this case, you know, the minority, dancing for the majority, so it can really get along or not. It's also this old, I think, Jewish saying, maybe not, you can't dance in two weddings at the same time, so it has a lot of that. And of course, it's very controversial. I get this question. I can say this, I also said it last night. You're probably one of the last audiences to see the film in its original title, because all the distributors around the world are changing it. Because, and you know, in Paris it's called Mon Fils, my son, but it's doing well, so I can't complain. You know, it's like it's weird. It's sadly, I have to say, seriously and sadly, the word Arabs is probably one of the least popular words in the world today. Which is sad, but it's true.
Wow.
Yeah.
He doesn't even dance, so, right? That creates confusion. I'm
Yeah.
joking. I'm joking. Other comments? Got something in the back, please.
Does the actual mixing between the minority students and coming to Israeli schools, does that happen in any quantity, or is this just a one-time shot at it, or what?
Well, you know, it's interesting. We actually, in universities, it's totally different. In schools, this is quite rare. But actually, I actually shot in the real school where Syed Kashua, the writer, was, I think, the first Arab to go to this school. But, you know, this is, of course, a school for, you know, very bright kids. So it's kind of, I guess, you have to be special anyway. No, I think there's a big separation. It's in Israel. Once it comes to universities, but I have to say this: the film. I'm glad to say that the film, and I'm only judging this by Facebook. I have to say, but I had so many reactions on Facebook from Arabs in Israel that made me really happy that they actually went to the cinemas. Because normally they don't, because there's no cinemas in their areas. You know, it's a long story. And the fact is, so many people, old and young, wrote to me, "This is our story." And I remember it when I was a student in Tel Aviv University back in the, I don't know when, a long time ago. It was the same story. You know, I was in cinema and theater. There were very talented Arab actors, and you know, their life changes because they come from some village in from a remote place, and you know, lots of tradition and totally different culture, and suddenly they're exposed. You know, to put it very simply, it's the Western world. Let's put it that way, and it creates a huge conflict. And so really, I think the film is probably true to most Arabs in Israel in terms of at least those who actually really move to study in universities.
Other comments? Yeah, please.
Historically, Jews have been the oppressed rather than oppressors. It's very uncomfortable to watch Jews in the role of oppressors. How is that text received in Israel, and what implications does it have for the eventual political settlement of the situation there?
The second part is a tough one. First of all, the film was well received in Israel, I have to say, which was good news, especially after the summer that we had, which was very traumatic for everybody. You know, what you said is the absolute truth in terms of, I'm proud to be, it's complicated wording, I won't be careful, but I'll say I'm proud to be part of the oppressed people who maybe became oppressors at some point throughout the last century, and maybe I have to be a little bit more sensitive about that role. And you know, it doesn't matter what the reasons for that role are at the moment. And I think it's all about sensitivity. It's really about being open and open-minded and being just a little bit, you know, just to think a little bit more before you do some kind of action. Which is, you can also translate this into a political statement, which, you know, I would say applies to all politicians in Israel, on both sides. It's not about right or left or right or wrong. For me, the sadness is that this air of indifference has settled into Israel, and I think that's the worst enemy of anything, anywhere. Indifference is really a bad thing.
Is it indifference, or is it a sense of hopelessness?
It's hopelessness. It's, it's a combination of fear. There's always fear,
Right.
because the Jewish people are always oppressed. There's a fear that we're not going to go back there. So that creates a certain attitude, I think. It's fear, it's hopelessness, it's indifference. It's so many words you can apply. And yet, I have to say, the only reason I make films, any film, is because I'm an optimist. And, being optimistic is also something important to remember.
Well, there's something too in the generational divide, that is that Naomi's mother had wants nothing to do, her to have anything to do with him. You wonder if she actually got to meet him and see him,
Sure.
and see what an incredibly sweet, sensitive, smart human being he is, Eyad, that she might change her mind, but that's not even in the realm of possibility. But Naomi is completely open to it, and you don't get a sense like she's, this is a touristic thing for him. She's genuinely taken with him, and she admires him, and that's such a wonderful moment when she kisses him in the class, because that's her announcement.
Yeah.
And I also love the fact that that scene of his critique of Israeli literature and its depiction of Arabs and sex comes exactly after the first lovemaking scene in the theater. It's a great juxtaposition.
It's interesting because there were so many discussions where we're showing rough cuts of the film. I had so many people sort of saying you should switch those scenes around. First, you should talk, then they should. And I said no. This is the way it should be, because otherwise it becomes really condescending in a way. And so, but and, I think half the writers in Israel are not talking to me now, and because actually, he talks about The Lover by Abraham B. Yoshua, and I made a film based on the voyage of the human resources manager 4 years ago.
Right.
And luckily, he hasn't seen the film yet. But, that phone call didn't arrive yet, but it will.
We have a comment in the back.
A question. I'm curious, this is not the first film where you've explored the role of Israeli citizens of Arab origin. And I'm curious why this is of such interest to you, and is there a larger message?
There is a larger message, but I'll leave it to you, basically, because I don't like messages in a way. The film is the message, it's Marshall McLuhan all over again. I don't know. I really don't know what to say about that. The film is out there and serves its purpose. And the reason it's actually interesting, but this is actually the first film in which I'm dealing with the Arabs who live inside the country, who are Israeli citizens on any level. Because The Syrian Bride was really about the Druze, and the Syrian Druze who live in the Golan Heights, a different story. And Lemon Tree was really about the Palestinians across the border. And in fact, when you think about it, this is probably only the second film that deals with Israeli Arabs or Palestinians who have an Israeli citizenship. Depends how you want, which definition you want to use. Only Ajami before a few years ago dealt with it, but from a different angle. And so I just feel it's important. My message is one, that we cannot live in Israel and have 1.6 million people, like I pointed out at the beginning of the film, living right here, right next to us, among us. We live amongst them, and they're totally transparent. It's like they're not there. It doesn't make sense to me. So the film is not about they're not transparent. It's not a kind of 60s message, but it's about the reality around us and us Israelis. Now, take this story, put it in Germany, have the Turkish minority versus the German majority, bring it over to the States, it's even more obvious. This story applies to really seriously any society, and I think that's the message, is to just look around, basically, and make sure that your prejudice, which we all have, does not take the better part of you, I guess. That's sort of the message.
Thank you, and it comes across in all your work. So powerful. Please.
You mentioned the reaction of the
So we're not hearing you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do Israeli films, specifically your film, have an opportunity to be seen in the Palestinian areas, Gaza, West Bank?
Yeah, very tough. The whole Arab world is kind of sealed off for Israeli filmmakers. It doesn't matter what kind of films you make. It's all about politics at the end of the day. But my films, unfortunately pirated DVDs, so I don't even see 1 cent out of it. But yeah, my films are shown around. I mean, a lot of people see them. I'm always told if you fly to Amman or Damascus, you can go into a video store and get my films. On one hand. On the other hand, officially, it never happened. I think the only occasion I had was a few years ago to show a few films in Cairo, but even that was quite difficult. And in the Palestinian territories, I think there's only one cinema in Ramallah. So even if somebody wanted to show the film around, it's not that easy. But it's one of the unfortunate situations in which, in Israel you can see any film from any place and there's no question. In Arab countries, we still have a way to go in that sense.
Well, hopefully that will change. Let me ask you one final question. Oh, you got a question here. Okay.
Yeah.
Quick question, were the Arab characters played by all Arab actors?
Yes, I'm very tough on that issue because I never mix, because I feel an actor brings to the screen his own identity and his own culture and his own background and his own history. So I never mix, even though it's very, in Hollywood, of course, all the Jewish Israelis play Arab terrorists, and, I never do that. I never did it. The only thing I did in my previous film, I had an American actor playing an Israeli. But okay, that's different, I guess. But no, they're all Arab, and they're all really, I try to cast in such a way that the actor doesn't really have to go a long way to reach his character. So there's something, it applies also to the Jewish characters. There's something close between the character as written or as I see it and the casting that I do. It's a kind of principle, because otherwise I always feel the actor has to sweat too much to kind of reach his character.
Interesting question in a film about switched identities.
Yes.
But one of the great pleasures of this film, I think, is watching Ali Suleiman. We were talking earlier about this, who plays Ayad's father. He was one of the original terrorists in Paradise Now. He was the husband who didn't know his wife was a terrorist in the attack a couple of years ago. Yeah. He was the attorney in Lemon Tree. He's just one of the treasures among Arabic actors who turn up in Israeli and Palestinian films. So it's just great to see him.
I have to say that when I did The Syrian Bride, his older brother, Dirar, played the Syrian groom. I don't know if you saw the film, but and then I had a scene where the Syrian border officer goes away, the first one, who was actually the teacher here in the school principal here. And then I needed a second one. It was just, all he has to do is sit there and look at the passport and sort of say, I don't know what this is, come back on Sunday. And Dirar said, why don't you use my kid brother, Ali? And I did. And the minute he opened his mouth, I just said, wow, this is a great actor. So when I came to Lemon Tree, I cast him against all odds. He was too young for the role and all that, but I think he's an amazing actor. And I have to admit that my editor, who's French, we used to sit in the cutting room and sort of say, okay, we have a great cast, really, perfect cast, wonderful, but Ali is somewhere above them. He's just so perfect. But, okay, Yeah.
We are unfortunately out of time. Eran, thank you so much for talking with us.